I want you to think back to when you were a teenager, 14 to 15 years old, and imagine what you were doing at this point in your life. Laughing, playing sports, hanging out with friends, going to school. What kind of emotions do you feel when you think about this time? Some good? Some bad? Almost every teenager has that period where they consider running away. Or maybe there is some of you that couldn't imagine being separated from your family and friends. However, some of your realities were the complete opposite. Some of you became rebellious and disobeyed your parents. Some of you would actually decide to run away. That is the story of Keith Sapsford. Keith Sapsford was a 14-year-old Australian kid who found himself running away from home, but he didn't just run to a friend's house. Keith didn't intend to return home. He decided to head out of Australia altogether. Keith Sapsford got himself to the Sydney airport after leaving his school. Once he arrived at the airport, Keith snuck onto the tarmac where several planes were located. One plane, whose destination was Tokyo, Japan, became the vehicle for his escape. The open undercarriage of the Japan Airlines was too tempting to resist, and he climbed inside. Months before Keith stepped onto that tarmac, events were put into motion that impacted Keith's decisions and ultimately led him to climb into that plane's wheel well. Charles Sapsford, Keith's father, had told his son about a Spanish boy who had climbed into the undercarriage of a plane, costing him his life. Keith's father had hoped to discourage his adventurous son from taking such a risk, but it may have inspired him to hop on a plane to Japan. Born in 1956, Keith was a curious kid who always liked to be on the move. His family had actually just taken a trip overseas to satisfy his adventurous spirit. Unfortunately, he had a habit of running away, and even a long overseas trip was not enough to stop his wanderlust. But after their return home, Keith Sapsford was restless. His parents decided that some discipline and formalized structure was needed. Boys Town, a Roman Catholic educational institution located in the southern portion of Sydney, was seen as the best option for Keith. This institution specialized in dealing with troubled children, those who were in need of a structure and a formal discipline arrangement. His parents felt it would be the right thing to help him get on the best path. Unfortunately, the institution underestimated Keith's adventurous spirit, and he was able to run away just 2 weeks after his arrival. It is unclear what made him decide to head to the airport, or if Keith even knew the plane's destination when he climbed into the wheel well. Regulations at major airports were not as strict as the ones we deal with today, so it is not surprising that a teenager was able to sneak onto the tarmac. Keith saw a plane, Douglas DC-8, preparing for boarding and took the chance. Unlike that Spanish boy, he figured he could survive because Keith would be in the wheel well and could avoid the dangers of high altitude exposure. However, what Keith Sapsford did not consider was that the wheel well compartment would reopen when the plane's wheels retracted after takeoff. When that happened, Keith fell 200 feet to his death. His father believes that the evidence suggested that Keith might have also been crushed by the wheels when they attempted to retract. Either way, the result was a family's tragic loss of life and heartbreak. That heartbreak would live on for over 40 years before his parents passed away. On that day, below on the ground, amateur photographer John Gilpin happened to be at the airport. He was taking pictures of events at the airport, hoping one or two would be of good quality. Although he didn't know it at the time, John would end up capturing Keith Sapsford as he fell to his death. Later, when experts inspected the aircraft, they found handprints, footprints, and threads from the boy's clothes. They needed all the evidence to prove that Keith had been on the plane. Even more tragic, had Keith not fallen out of the plane, he would have likely frozen or suffocated to death. The compartment reached freezing temperatures and was not oxygenated. Surprisingly enough, John didn't realize what he had captured on film until nearly a week later. Developing his photographs from the day at the airport, John noticed a print with the silhouette of a boy falling feet first from the plane. His hands were raised up in the air, appearing to be an attempt to cling on to something and stop his fall. The U.S. Federal Aviation Authority published research that showed just 1 in 4 airplane stowaways survive the flight. Survivors hitch a ride on short trips with low heights, but there are no surviving stowaways on planes that reach cruising altitude, except one. Statistics show there have been 96 recorded stowaway attempts between 1947 and 2012 in the wheel well compartments over the course of 85 flights. Only 23 of them survived. That meant 73 people died attempting to get a free trip. However, the one amazing story is that of Themba Kabeka. a man from Johannesburg, South Africa, who was left homeless at the age of 15 after his adoptive mother died. The struggles of homelessness in South Africa pales in comparison to homelessness in the Western world. He was constantly battling with figuring out where he was going to sleep, where and what he was going to eat, as well as living in constant fear of what could happen to him on the street. He was eating out of dustbins, sleeping in the trash, his clothes and his blankets were dirty, and he was at the mercy of being bullied and or killed, and no one would even know. However, one phrase carried him through the hardship. He didn't want to see his dreams die until he was an old man. He would rather die trying. Themba and his friend Carlito decided to come up with a plan to escape their situation. They were going to sneak into the wheel well of a British Airways flight from Johannesburg to London, England. Themba would collect magazines from the airport and began to read the magazines and see what life was like in England. He saw that his only opportunity was to fly out of South Africa. They formulated a plan and decided that day was their last day in Johannesburg. They decided to destroy all their belongings in their homeless camp. After initiating the first step in their plan, they set off for Johannesburg Airport. Once they arrived, they scoped out their target, a British Airways Boeing 747. They had to time climbing into the wheel well just perfectly in order to not be seen or arrested. Once on the tarmac, they saw a window of opportunity and ran and climbed into the wheel well. Themba had to secure himself, so he held onto the irons, a metallic plain interior piece in which he could wrap himself around. His friend Carlito sat to the right of him, with the wheel acting as a divider between the two. Upon takeoff, the two felt excited in the moment, sensing that they had made it. They had avoided security and were now embarking on their journey to a better life. Shortly after takeoff, Themba passed out due to a lack of oxygen. Temperatures in the undercarriage reached minus 60 degrees Celsius. Themba and Carlito were in the air under these conditions for almost 11 hours. Upon the plane landing into Heathrow, Themba fell out of the landing gear, about 10 to 20 feet off the ground, at a speed in excess of 150 miles an hour. After impact, Themba begins to wake up and sees two people running at him. One man says, "Hey, check this guy. He just jumped out of the plane." At first, Themba thought he was just dreaming. Still asleep in the wheel well of the plane, he soon realized it was not a dream. The two men picked up Themba and transported him to a local hospital. He was basically frozen, and his blood was not circulating. They immediately began to put heaters and heated blankets on Themba to help get his core body temperature up as quickly as possible. Themba fell into a coma and was in the coma for over 6 months. After he awoke, he could not move. Despite his situation, Themba was glad that he was alive. To this day, Themba has severe mobility issues and has to use crutches to walk. Shortly thereafter, authorities showed him a passport of Carlito, asking if he knew him. He replied, "Yes, I know him." They informed him that he did not make it. Themba asked, "How?" Carlito had fallen out of the plane and landed on top of a building from over 200 feet in the air, and because Themba was passed out, he was unaware what had happened to his friend. Themba has a sense of guilt and sadness for his friend Carlito, as they were embarking on this long and dangerous journey to live a better life and have a better future, and he never made it. Themba lives in Liverpool, and for a long time he never received any help. However, he was alive and breathing, and was thankful that he could survive. He received help here and there from people, but no one stuck it out for Themba, and they would disappear as fast as they came, until Themba met a young man named Gabriel. It was a cold day in Liverpool, and Themba was outside a supermarket called Tesco. Gabriel had spotted Themba and approached him and said, "You want anything from inside?" Themba asked for a coffee and a ham and cheese sandwich. Gabriel went inside, got the coffee, the ham and cheese sandwich, and returned outside, gave them to Themba, and went about his day. A few days later, Gabriel's sister showed Gabriel an article from the Daily Mail on Themba. At first, Gabriel was wondering for a few days, "Where do I know this guy? Where have I seen his face before?" After reading the article further, he realized Themba was living in Liverpool, and put two and two together and remembered, he was the guy I saw outside Tesco just a few days earlier. Gabriel said to his friends, "I'm gonna change this guy's life." A few days later, Gabriel spotted Themba on the main road as he was driving and immediately pulled over and told Themba to get in. Gabriel took Themba to another supermarket, Aldi, and bought him a bunch of food, toiletries, anything that he needed and that he said would help him live a better life. Gabriel then went with Themba back to his house to help him get everything into his home. Gabriel then came to a stark realization. No matter how much food, how many clothes he gets Themba, it isn't going to change his life due to his living situation. Themba was living in a rundown apartment in a bad part of town, and it was barely functioning. Its best utility was the fact it put a roof over Themba's head. Gabriel told Themba he would be back tomorrow, and so Gabriel returned and took him back to his house, where he gave him a haircut, some more new clothes, showered, and cleaned him up. Ever since they met, Gabriel has been doing everything he can to try and make Themba's life better. Themba, wanting to go to school to learn English and take courses, feels a warm sense of friendship and appreciation toward Gabriel, as he has made it his mission to help him any way possible. Gabriel's first goal was to help Themba get a more permanent living situation where he will feel comfortable and safe so he can put his focus on academics. Gabriel decided to set up a fundraiser for Themba and was able to raise enough money to help him find a new place to live. Themba said in an interview, "I want God to look after this guy, because he's doing all this for me from his heart." This story goes to show that if you see someone less fortunate than you, don't always neglect them. Take time out of your day to find out who they are, because you never know. You just might be able to change their life.